afternoon and welcome to CJLO 1690 AM. My name is Michael Brody. I'm joined today by Shane Simmons, and you're experiencing episode either 52 or 53, Cinema Smackdown. I'll double check the numbers later.
We're never going to get it right. We can't count.
That's fine. We're in the ballpark.
You do this many episodes, you just lose track and you stop caring.
It's episodes 52 or 53 of the all-new, all-different Cinema Smackdown.
All different because now we have a promo running elsewhere on
We do have a promo running on occasion, and we had a format change. And
only a year ago.
I know, but it's the all-new, all-different.
Arrests pending as soon as they find Tessa's remains.
Well, speaking of all-new, all-different, today's topic is the all-new, all-different films of the last decade.
We're getting close to the end of an entire decade.
Yeah, so we are actually going to run down films of the decade.
So it gives us extra burden when we're doing our year-end wrap-up type stuff. It's like, oh god, we have to wrap up a whole decade as well.
Yeah, so we're going to actually do a couple of weeks worth of, and I like to go a little differently than just best of, because everyone does best of. I'm going to do most underrated films of the decade, which means we're going to talk about some of the films we think are the best.
And these are a lot of films you might have missed.
Exactly.
So,
keep that pen handy.
Yeah, good to recommend stuff that's a little under the radar other than the 30,000 Marvel films that came out in the last decade.
Yep, in the last decade I have exactly one Marvel film to recommend. One. One that I feel is underrated. Not unknown. But
really, there's an underrated one that just flew under everybody's radar.
Yeah, we'll get to it in 5 years. In the 5th year of our chat. But I don't know how many we're going to cover today. We may cover half the decade. We may only cover a third.
I'm predicting this is going to be a 10-episode series.
Well, I mean,
if we get out of 2010, I'll be surprised today.
I do have a lot to mention, but we'll see what kind of speed we deal with. But we're not going to rush things. We have, I would say we have 3 to 4 weeks. We could do this over before we have to get to the films of 2019. So we'll only cover 2019.
Yeah, we'll wait until the year is actually over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As there are a number of releases pending that we will be seeing.
Well, of course, we all know that rocketing to the top of everyone's list on Friday will be Rise of Skywalker, because we all know that's going to be a masterpiece. It'll just wrap up the entire franchise in a nice little bow. There will be no loose ends. It'll be completely satisfying to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's unlikely to defeat the more important movie that opened this week, Jumanji 2, More Jumanji, whatever that movie is called.
The Jumanjier of the Jumanji-ish.
I was astonished to notice, and wow, this is so off topic of what we should be getting to, but I was astonished to notice that, I have not seen that film, but when they did the first new Jumanji movie, they rewrote the rules, they added a whole different cast, they made everything different, and this is the next one where they did everything the same as the one where they did everything different. It appears to be a carbon copy of the reboot film. Same actors.
First one was a largely forgotten Robin Williams vehicle, and now, decades later, you reboot, and the reboot is so massively successful, there's nothing to do but to remake the same film over and over and over again.
Which is crazy. It's like, we finally made a few changes. Oh, never mind. At any rate, less about this week's forgettable, soon-to-be never-mentioned-again releases, and on to the movies starting in 2010 that I consider to be the most underrated films of the decade. Shane, I hope you have a few. We have not discussed our lists ahead of time. Why don't you open us up with one of your choices from 2010?
Okay, well, I'm going to hit you with the one that you recommended to me that I watched only last night.
Okay.
I figured this was going to come up in conversation, and I wanted to watch it, not because I didn't know anything about the film other than the title.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to forge ahead. I know this is going to be dark. That's all I know about it. So I watched Red, White, and Blue.
Yeah.
This is one of your recommendations.
It is.
That in the show of recommendations, I think we're going to have to agree we don't recommend this to anybody.
No, that's not true. I won't say I don't recommend it to anybody, but I'll recommend it to the strongest stomached, hardest people.
Yeah,
with massive, massive warning. This may be the harshest film ever made.
It's up there.
It is up there
it
with
is,
the
it is
reflecting
one of the
skin.
it is one of the most uncompromising films I've ever seen.
Yeah, Serbian movie.
Yeah,
it is not that kind of film. It's not like Serbian
it's not.
film.
Yeah, it's not super ultra violent. A lot of the elements of violence of it are suggested more than actually depicted literally. But it starts. There's a good long stretch where I was depressed by the film to the point it was giving me a headache.
Wow.
And then I thought, God, this is just bleak in a way that you rarely get to see a film be bleak. The first 5 minutes of the film is completely dialogue free, and it just shows someone living their life, and it is a depressing, upsetting, crappy life filled with meaningless sex and awfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really well done piece of virtually silent cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And then when people start talking, oh, their lives don't get any better. And it takes a very long time to let you know where it's going with this story, because it gets to a midpoint where the main story seems to just get put on hold, and a whole other story with characters we've seen before, but only in a very minor capacity. It takes up much of the rest of the film telling their story, and then it shows how these two stories combine, and the combo is a pretty upsetting. As if the rest of the film wasn't upsetting enough, it really does not pull any punches.
Yeah, the movie Red, White, and Blue is written and directed by a gentleman named Simon Rumley. Rumley mostly made low-budget horror films. I guess you couldn't really be argued this is not one of those.
It
but it's
kind of is, and it isn't. It's a kind of an exploitation film, but it's sort of like an art-sploitation film.
It's an art-sploitation film. I have only ever heard of this movie being mentioned by a couple of critics ever, at all. Mostly they champion it. Everyone else ignores this film. It stars an actress named Amanda Fuller, and an indie guy who's made a million indie films named Mark Center. And, what's his name? The slightly more well-known actor is Noah Taylor. Noah Taylor, you might recognize from, I think it's called The Year My Voice Broke, or something like that. It's a coming-of-age Australian film with him and, is that the one with Nicole Kidman? Anyway, he's in a film with Nicole Kidman when they're both quite young, and he's also in Almost Famous, playing their manager. And I've always kind of liked him, but this is the movie where they let him have a part. He has the key part for me in this movie. I guess the thing to say about this film is it is probably the harshest female character I've ever seen in a movie. Her a cynical, dark, ruined take on life is something to be beheld and appreciated. This movie will not make you happy, but it will, I hate to say things like this, it will change you. It is a brilliant film. I really, really loved the movie Red, White, and Blue.
And sometimes, you'll recommend an upsetting film to me, or I'll recommend an upsetting film to you. And when I run movie night, I will often subject them to some of these films that was like, we can't show this to anybody, but this is so good, I have to show it to them. And they will just have to find their strong stomach and get through it. This one, I will not be showing them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is.
This is just.
You showed them Downrange.
Yeah.
Which is a rough movie from 2018. But anyways,
I've shown them many rough films, but this is a film that's like, no one will thank me for watching this.
Yeah. And it does have a couple of very, very satisfying, I won't call them plot twists, but developments. It has some very satisfying developments in terms of where things go.
No, it pays off well enough, but not in a way that makes anybody happy.
I would say it's one of those movies where the big moments don't so much feel surprising as they do inevitable. Mm-hmm. And they are, you see them coming, and as they quietly land, you're just like, oof, over and over. It's hard not to get into the plot of this film, but I can't do it justice, so I'm not going to. I'll simply say, if you have a strong stomach and are into deeply dark films, Red, White, and Blue from 2010 by Simon Rumley is, I can't recommend a film higher, It is by far my favorite movie, I think, of that year. Or at least it's certainly my favorite underrated movie of 2010, if not my favorite. And yeah, I think enough said about that one. Let's move on.
When you watch it, don't write in and complain.
Yeah, yes, that's a big, giant flashing warning on Red, White, and Blue. I wanted to mention this as quickly as possible because it was a massive movie that, no matter what, will always be underrated. From 2010, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. This movie is so good, and it should have been genre-changing. It's an action film with action that is so effective. There is a tiny bit of, I want to just say, animation in the fight scenes where you see speed lines and stars when people get punched in the face. The movie makes so many strides forward, I'm astonished every action movie doesn't try to copy it now. That is how much I love the fight scenes in this movie. On top of which, it's lyrical and pretty and funny, and it's a magical movie that failed harder than anything up until Cloud Atlas. It is amazing how not well received it was. It just, no one went to see it. They didn't hate it, they just didn't see it.
I think it was an element of Hollywood not having confidence in the film, because it's very imbued in pop culture stuff that Hollywood more recently does a little better, but at the time was not doing well at all, namely video games and comic books.
Right.
And yeah, the pop culture elements of it are fringe enough that I think the marketers just kind of threw their hands up and said, we don't know what to do with this.
To be clear, I was around during the marketing of 2010 Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I have rarely seen a movie harder marketed than that film.
Yeah, but did they nail the tone for people?
How do you nail that tone and let people know they're going to want a new tone?
Yeah. Well, it
reinvented a lot of things.
This is my point with a lot of marketing, is that yes, sometimes they have a budget. Doesn't mean they're going to nail it, though. Doesn't mean they're going to be able to. That the marketers understand the product that they're trying to sell enough to actually sell it to the target audience. And I've used this example time and again of a number of films I've really enjoyed where I would see the trailer for the film and walk away having no idea what the hell that just was.
Yes, that can be a problem.
And for me, that's intriguing. But for most people sitting in the theater who watch a trailer and go, I don't understand even what genre that's supposed to be, they're not going to go see it.
All right, well said. We'll be back after this message with more of the most underrated films of the decade. Wow, that was well said. Good job.
Are you looking to blow off some semester steam? Look no further
Obviously
than Montreal's
with,
Laser
oh,
Quest.
that's loud. Obviously, Scott Pilgrim is one of those movies where, like, everyone knows this movie exists. But I have said this many times. Hey, have you seen Scott Pilgrim lately? You need to see it again.
Mm-hmm.
I say it all the time. It's like, yeah, I saw it in 2011. Watch it again. It's actually a lot like the Spider-Verse film, which also reinvents ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You can almost never see these movies enough, in my opinion. They just get better with every viewing. And yeah, I mean, I asked the Scott Pilgrim question at trivia, and I finished with, however more recently you saw Scott Pilgrim, it was too long ago. You need to watch it again. Which I don't say about films. I just don't bring that up. I rewatched 20 Minutes of Spider-Verse the other day, and it was just like, yeah, I think I can just endlessly rewatch this like once a month and just always fall in love with the storytelling. It just takes so many brilliant risks, every one of which pays off for me. But they're similar in their pow zap flashes. And we are about to be back. TJLO.com. And we're back on TJLO 1690 AM. My name's Michael Brody. I'm joined by Shane Simmons. You're listening to Cinema Smackdown, where we are beginning our journey of listing what we consider to be the most underrated films of the decade. And judging by the fact that it took us 15 minutes to mention 2 movies of 2010, we may be in for a more multi-parted series than I expected.
We will be talking on this subject until 2024.
Here is another movie that I'm pretty sure is on your list, and if not, it's only because you forgot to put it there.
Mm-hmm.
Another 2010 movie that is, again, it doesn't matter how much press this gets, it will always be underrated. It is Super by James Gunn.
Yes.
That movie is, again, I will issue a warning for that film. It's a little rough. It's a little uncomfortable.
It is also possibly the best superhero movie ever made.
It is definitely, in a certain category, it may be the best superhero movie ever made. I mean, that genre has become widespread now. And this is the one where it fully embraces superheroes while also telling you they're terrible and mocking them. The movie is sort of a comedy while saying much larger
But it is a
things
pitch black comedy.
Pitch black comedy.
And the idea that if you want to get into a costume and fight crime, you have to be severely mentally ill.
Yeah, agreed. I feel exactly the same way about it. Rainn Wilson gives a performance I never expected. It's not all that different from his other performances, except there's no line.
Yeah,
When he plays Dwight Schrute on The Office, he's a little unhinged, but there does come a point where he's still a person. Well, that line is gone in this.
He's still a sad sack, but he's a sad sack who will hit you in the head with a wrench.
Yeah, and I mean just that reality of...
Speaking of another mismarketed film, that was another one.
Again, how could you possibly market that movie?
Exactly.
How could you?
To the point where there are scenes they show you in the trailer that's like, ha ha ha, slapstick funny. And then you see it within the context film, it's like, no, that was disturbing and violent and awful.
Yeah.
And I've had people get upset at me when I've shown them the film, saying, that was upsetting and violent and awful, that wasn't funny.
Right.
It's like, yeah, kind of the point.
Yeah. We're, once in a while, you should see a movie with a guy in a costume and think, oh, wait, this isn't a good idea. Maybe you have mental problems.
Yeah. And matching him insanity for insanity, but in a different vein, is Ellen Page as his sidekick character.
In the finest role I could ever imagine.
She will never be
having.
better in anything.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I have enjoyed her in many, many films.
Yep.
Even films where I don't like the movie, she's often the standout. I will point to a terrible movie, which is the remake of Flatliners from a few years ago.
Yes.
Which, let's be clear, she's not great in, but she's certainly the highlight of the movie, and her character arc is stunningly strange. It is also abrupt. That's enough said about that. But yeah, Ellen Page, I'm a fan, and let me tell you, I don't like Juno, and that movie for me was a black mark against her career. Like I found it very hard to get over that performance. So it's to her.
Yeah, but I mean,
her skill level.
Imagine someone lesser in that role and how annoying that film would be. It would be just exponentially more irritating.
No, I'm sorry to tell you that for me, that was her performance in Juno.
I don't know.
I didn't like it.
I don't know. I can picture a lot of actresses in that role that would make an irritating film much more irritating.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but it really didn't help my appreciation of her career, which now I'm a huge fan of. And I understand most people love Juno. It rubbed me wrong at a certain point, and then it kind of it graded and started grading more and more and more.
Well, it's the Diablo Cody script. It is sinks indeed. That and everything else she touches.
I will also say that going forward from there, I have become quite a fan of Jason Reitman, especially his dramas. Anything where he's just got people talking to each other in a normal-ish setting, I find very compelling. He's a much better director than I thought he would turn out to be given his first couple films. I didn't like Thank You for Smoking.
I enjoyed that one.
But as he became a more mature filmmaker with interesting stories to tell, he actually downgraded to more generic, gentle storytelling, and I actually find that much more compelling in his style.
Well, now he has the heavy burden of saving Ghostbusters from franchise oblivion.
Yeah, well, we can't all make great choices every time out. At any rate, that's super huge, giant recommendation. But again, huge grain of, be aware, this movie it's a little painful in places. It's a little rough. I guess I said super, so do you have another one for me?
Yes, I do. So, another mismarketed film, because that's probably going to be a theme. This is how films end up being underrated and underappreciated, is that they just didn't get sold to the audience correctly.
Sure.
I thought this was going to be a bizarro comedy prison romance film. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about I Love You, Philip Morris.
Okay.
The Ewan McGregor, Jim Carrey, gay lovers in a prison movie.
I'm very fond of it. I wasn't aware you were as fond of it.
I am a tremendous fan of this film.
Mm-hmm.
I love this film, and it caught me by surprise because it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And it takes a while for it to reveal. I'm going to give it a slight spoiler here, but it's not a major one, and hopefully this will help pitch the film to you better than the marketing campaign did. It's a prison escape film. It's an escape artist film. Mm-hmm. It is based on a true story of a guy who went through the Texas prison system. I think he hit a number of prisons over the course of his nefarious career, and he was a genius at figuring out ways to escape and brilliant escape plots, like stuff on the level of The Great Escape.
Yeah.
Except it wasn't a group of brilliant allied prisoners cobbling together, all this shenanigans to fool the Germans and get a whole bunch of guys out by a tunnel. This was one guy figuring crap out himself, all in an attempt to reunite with his lover, Ewan McGregor, and it's just wonderful, charming, dark, funny, and I looked into the case history of it quite thoroughly after the movie, and all the crazy stuff is true, and there's even more of it that they couldn't include in one film.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think it's great. You watch I Love You, Philip Morris. Is it Morris?
Yeah.
And then go read a fact-based article on
Well,
it.
there's an entire book.
Well, I mean,
about the case.
I'm not putting on anybody. Any book you want, but the easiest thing to do is...
go read the Wikipedia or something then, if you don't want to just a quick read.
The point being that once you've seen the outrageous escapes that he does in this, they left out some of the funnier, crazier, smarter ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. There were that many more. The crayon dyeing of his prison uniform escape.
Right.
Is so much more interesting than
creating a dye vat in his toilet.
Yeah, it is so much more interesting than what is depicted in that film, and I cannot get over the fact they didn't quietly just lay out how he escaped from prison based on changing the color of his prison uniform.
The jumpsuit. Yeah,
yeah. He changed the color of his prison jumpsuit to more carefully match the nurses that came in and out of the prison, and then walked out with them. It is extraordinary. But you have to read.
Yeah, so some of this stuff in the movie is handled almost as a montage.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much of it.
That's right. It's an astonishing story about a truly crazy person and a really interesting...
Crazy but brilliant.
Yep.
To the point where, he's... last I heard he was still doing time. Because, there's only so many times you can escape from the prison before they just throw away the key. Mm-hmm. But he's so clever, you kind of just want him to get out on a pass and say, hey, you know what? Help us improve prison security.
Yeah,
that should be your job from now on.
And that, there are entire franchises of movies like that. Like the Sylvester Stallone franchise Escape Plan, that is what that is.
Right.
Showing you how to escape from your inescapable prisons. It's kind of funny.
But other than Escape from Alcatraz and The Great Escape, there are not many that are based in fact. And it's like, here's all the crazy stuff and brilliant stuff people did to get out of a tough situation.
It's interesting. Very, very interesting movie. And by, I can't remember their names, but it's...
Right, I always forget their names too. The two guys, those guys.
Glenn and...
Rick.
Yeah, it's like Requa and something. And they're the two gentlemen who went on to make... to write, but not direct. I think they directed.
They directed this, yeah.
But they wrote Bad Santa. They're among our directing teams I was going to mention a few weeks ago.
Yes, okay.
Directing duos. But mainly they started as writers. They directed Crazy Stupid Love without writing it, which is one of my favorite movies for just, wow, that's shockingly good considering it's a cute romantic comedy. But they are also kind of the two guys who've been spearheading a lot of the juggernaut television show This Is Us. They're the original pilot directors, and they've come back to do a few episodes here and there. They launched that ship, to say, and they have an interesting, although not perfect, career. They've made 2 movies in a row now I haven't been fond of. They did Focus with Will Smith, which is weirdly forgettable, and they made that Tina Fey war movie.
Oh, that one, yes.
Was clamoring for a Tina Fey.
Well, I was amused by that. I will.
I thought it was a little on the dull side, although it's acceptable, but it wasn't special. Their early films I found very, very special. Like as you said, I Love You, Philip Morris is a great movie.
Also notable as probably the I can't think of a more recent good or interesting Jim Carrey project.
Exactly. Well, to be fair, everything Jim Carrey has done lately is offbeat. The only thing
Insane paintings?
Yeah, but aside, I'm talking about his actual work. His television show is extremely strange, and his last 3 or 4 movies, some of which were barely released. He made a bleak, I want to say Russian, but I'm not sure, it might have been, Russian thriller that's all murder. And it is a rough movie to sit through. And when you realize it's a Jim Carrey, you have to keep reminding yourself, is this Jim Carrey? It's just the bleakest thriller you've ever seen. It's up there. I don't recommend that one, but it is fascinating that that's where it is. He's taken the Robin Williams career trajectory and doubled down on harsh stuff.
Yeah, that's a fair comparison.
At any rate...
going from the really light, silly comedies to something with a little more weight to, oh wow, that was really dark.
Well, we're still in 2010, and I've got 5 more movies to mention, but I'm going to mention them a lot more briefly. These are all very valid films. They're not quite as important to me, but I do care about all of them, and they're all very underrated. There is the Australian thriller in a small town called Red Hill, which is extremely well-directed, moody, has wonderful performances, and just enough of a kick in places. Red Hill is an excellent little thriller. I don't think anybody's ever brought it up. It's one of those I feel has no presence.
I have shown it movie night.
Yeah, beautiful film. I'll mention a couple more in passing. There is a dark British thriller called Cherry Tree Lane, which is a simple home invasion movie where some teenagers break into someone's house and do bad things to them. And it is one of those movies where you will be gripping the edge of your armrests for the entire film in aggravation, frustration, and pain at watching people do bad things to other people. It is one of those films that just doesn't get talked about, and it's one of the best because it's not supernatural. It's not The Strangers, which is highly stylized. It feels unpleasantly real in that way of people just not backing down from a bad idea. And that film's called Cherry Tree Lane. It stayed with me, so that tells you something. I've also got the movie starring one of the earlier The Rock vehicles, where it's just a charming crime film he's in called Faster. And all it is, guy gets out of jail, he's got to get stuff done starting now, and it's sort of a race to the bottom. It's a shockingly entertaining film that failed hard. The antagonist in the movie, someone who's sort of following him along for the whole movie is Billy Bob Thornton. So it's sort of a The Rock, Billy Bob Thornton, not exactly buddy film, but it just never showed up anywhere. No one talks about this one. I think it's more charming as these kind of cute little obsessive crime style movies than most, and it has a weird pacing and energy. That's actually what I'd say. It's called Faster, and it does have a certain energy to it. It's a pretty good film from 2010. Do you have a couple to mention?
I want to just get a few foreign films out of the way that I'll mention quickly.
Sure.
We have the Greek film Dogtooth, which was
Well, that was 2010?
Yep, it was.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, that would have been on my list had I taken the time. That is a challenging film, but rewarding.
Yeah, certainly you will spend the first half hour of the film going, I don't understand anything that's going on in this film. Stick with it.
I think the important thing to know is, if you're watching the movie subtitled, because you don't speak Greek, keep in mind that it will appear as though the subtitles are wrong.
Yes, because
several times
they are using incorrect words for things.
Yep.
And this is on purpose.
I would just simply say, your subtitles aren't wrong.
Yeah.
Just go with it.
Go with it. Have faith that by about half an hour in, you will start to understand the situation, and go with it from there. I also want to mention this was actually probably one of the most successful films of the decade, but here it's going to be very obscure. I'm sure you probably have not heard, most of you anyway, have not heard of the Indian film Enthiran, also known as Robot. It is a gigantic Bollywood musical science fiction film with some of the most inventive computer-animated robot action scenes I've ever seen, and such bizarre, alien, foreign attitudes towards certain things that it is unreleasable here.
Mm-hmm.
But try and check it out. And, as per Bollywood, just try to suffer through some of the musical numbers, which will strike Western eyes as, why is this science fiction film taking place in India suddenly having a giant musical sequence in Machu Picchu?
I'll remind the listeners that you're listening to CGLS 1690 AM. Our show is called Cinema Smackdown, and we are beginning our journey very, very, very slowly of the most underrated films of the decade. I will echo what you just said about, what is the title of that film again?
Enthiran.
Yeah, I will echo your comments about how North Americans or Westerners will find this movie difficult or challenging. I found it to be nigh unwatchable, but I would never tell you it's not inventive, interesting, or everything else. It was so not for me.
It is also 3 hours because those musical numbers really pad the running time.
Yeah.
If you do not have the patience for this, I do recommend going on YouTube and just watching the robot action sequence highlights. People have made supercuts of it. It'll save you watching the rest of the film, and unless you're really interested, that's probably going to be enough for you.
It's probably going to be enough.
Also recommending the Spanish film The Last Circus, which is the darkest clown movie ever made. That takes place during the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s. And the Norwegian films Rare Exports and Troll Hunter, which are two excellent monster movies.
Yeah, they're both movies that fall well under my recommended list, but I guess are interesting curiosities. I think during both of their running times, I was struck with, oh my god, there was so much padding in this film. It feels like a short that was drawn out to, I think they're both over 90 minutes. And they're both films where it's like, we're about to give you a big punch, and I'm like, it's a short. Just make it a short. You're killing me here. That's
Troll Hunters, I showed that cold to movie night. I think I switched things around so that they didn't know the title of the film, because the title's a bit of a giveaway, because it takes a good half hour for you to realize, oh, this is what they're up against. Oh, this is not what I was expecting.
Right.
Rare Exports was another movie night one, which was a tremendous hit. Highly recommended for Christmas. It is a Christmas movie. It has a very interesting take on Santa Claus, and we will leave it at that.
It's a gimmick film, and for me, the gimmick wasn't enough time to make for 90 minutes and be happy about it. Again, had that been a 30
Meanwhile, I had people at movie night come to me who were absolutely delighted with this film in ways.
Understandable.
It's a case of, wow, I never ever would have watched that on my own unless you forced me to.
Right.
And now that I've seen it, I'm so happy I've seen this, because this is just not like anything else you will see in your usual, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars universe crap.
No, Marvel is absolutely developing an evil Santa Claus movie.
It'll be the Blob.
I will quickly mention 3 more titles from 2010, and then we will be rid of it, because, boy, this is a long year. 3 more movies of note, just real quick. I am a massive apologist for the 2010 failed action movie, The Losers, starring Jeffrey Dean Morgan.
Yes. I was wondering if you would mention that.
And it features some delightful... This is a movie that is all set pieces. Everything in it is a 3 to 10 minute scene that builds from something to something to something with a massive payoff. The payoffs are great. All of the dialogue in this movie is odd and interesting and intriguing, and features definitely my favorite villain of that year, played by Jason Patric. Jason Patric is indignant. He's like Lex Luthor, but even more annoyed. He just has such interesting shorthand, and he has a second-in-command guy, and they're out doing evil, and the losers have to come in and stop them. And I just really fell in love with this movie, and it is hated. It's one of those films where people just said it wasn't the movie I wanted it to be. I mean, it takes almost every generic concept of an action film and then does something a little different with each moment. And I guess if people just wanted a straightforward Stallone movie, well, they would have hated this. But I wanted something different. It gave it to me in spades. Again, I just love the characters. That's The Losers. And finally, 2 more. I can't not mention MacGruber, which is such a delightful mess. And if you tell me you hate this movie, yeah, I'm not shocked. Anyone who sees it asks so much of you to just follow running gags. But I will tell you, there were so many gems in MacGruber that are quietly now being mined bit by bit in other movies.
The fact that they made an entire film based on a one joke Saturday Night Live sketch premise that they just did over and over and over again.
Well, Deadpool 2 recently has a 15 to 20 minute bit with a big, hilarious payoff, and it is an identical sequence stolen directly from MacGruber. It's identical. They took the building of the team to the bad ending, quick thing. They did exactly that bit in MacGruber identically. So when I saw it in Deadpool 2, I was like, it's cute, but same ending. Same joke, same... Alright then.
Yeah, but MacGruber didn't have Brad Pitt for 1 second.
No. It mostly just has Will Forte being Will Forte to the extreme, much to most people's aggravation. But I'm very fond of it. Have you seen MacGruber?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Of course I have. Val Kilmer's in it.
It is the Val Kilmer movie of all. It is unstoppably Kilmer. He is probably at the worst his career will ever be in that film.
And yet this is probably the last good thing he'll ever be in.
Yeah. This and Mindhunters are my two go-to Val Kilmer crazy performances.
Yeah. Well, do you have one more? Or?
Yes, my final movie is called Peacock. It's also from 2010. It's a movie about Cillian Murphy, who is a hidden cross-dresser in a small-minded small town, whose cross-dressing side comes out to some degree during a massive train accident. And this is a shockingly engaging film. It is quiet and humble, filled with dignity and also strangeness, beautiful character work, an extremely well-made movie considering how totally unknown it seems to be. It's just called Peacock. It's from 2010. Very much worth your while looking. By the way, just to mention quickly, as of sometime at the beginning of January, all of my most underrated films will be listed on the CJLO radio website. I'm going to be writing a series of articles year by year about every film I liked and think need to be mentioned. So all of these, at least a list, will be out there.
Well, I have to mention two more myself, because the decade was diminishing returns for me. So the closer we get to now,
it's true.
The fewer films I will want to mention. But for some reason, 2010 was loaded for me.
2010 was good. 2009 and 2008 are massive, but we're not doing those. Right. To the next decade. Yeah, it is funny how once you get up to 2014, I only have 3 movies.
Wow. Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
So the lesser of two, I just want to mention this because it's completely forgotten. Occasionally there's a good horror movie remake. Remakes usually are terrible. Occasionally someone does a good one. One of the good ones, which completely surprised me, was a remake of the obscure George Romero film, The Crazies. Mm-hmm. I quite like the 2010 remake of it. The original is notable because it is sort of a dry run for his next film, which was Dawn of the Dead. Yeah. There's a lot of elements that carry over to that film. It's a similar plague-type situation where people are being driven crazy by an illness. And but it is not. As Romero films go, that one is very low budget and very not good. To the point where I'm glad, though, he got it out of his system because a lot of the ideas he was playing with, he got to nail in his next film, Dawn of the Dead.
Day of the Dead. No, it's pre.
No, Dawn. It was just before Dawn of the Dead. Yeah, including some of the cast members who would show up in later zombie films, including the Dr. Frankenstein from Day of the Dead. He's in The Crazies.
Right.
But yeah, the remake just solid. Takes a premise and does a much better job of it. Do recommend that one.
I like anything with Tim Oliphant as a lead, and there's not enough of that. The guy has an interesting charisma. It's an old school. He's almost like a 50s actor, but he was amazing on like a 6-season TV show called Justified, but they have not given him enough big screen stuff to be the guy in it. And he's getting older, and I really want him to find his, let's say his James Garner thing. You know, he's that kind of guy. He's almost got he's not quite George Clooney, but I feel like he could have had the same career given better options. So he's in a movie like The Crazies, he's not going to get a chance to be the standout. But Tim Oliphant's a great guy, and I really like to see him in more stuff.
And one other horror film I have to mention, which you will thank me for mentioning, even though it's not a horror film so much as what I have heard dubbed by a friend of mine, and I've latched onto this. It is survival porn. Kind of like torture porn, except there's no villain. It's just people stuck in a situation where they have to go through almost torture porn extremes to survive. But there's no malevolence to it. It's just run-of-the-mill, bad luck, bad situation, wrong place at the wrong time. And in this case, it is a little film called Frozen. No, not the Disney musical. About 3 people who just try to get one more ski run in for the day and end up trapped on a ski lift because the whole thing is shut down for a long weekend.
Right.
And they're stuck way up high in the dark, and they're going to die of exposure up there if they don't do something.
Yeah, and it's compelling. I have known people who said that they watched that entire movie on the edge of their seat, finding it impossible to disengage from it, just being completely enraptured by it. And I've had other people tell me, why did you recommend that? It was super boring. Nothing happened. I stared at a screen where people sat in chairs goofily talking to each other. And I think it's very subjective. That is a movie that works like gangbusters for some people and zero for others.
If there aren't moments in this film that make you wince, then you have a severe empathy disorder, and I would recommend seeking professional help.
All right, we did it. We did 2010.
There we go.
My God. Well, thankfully we can get through 5 or 6 more years in the next 17 minutes. For sure. We're going to move forward into 2011. We have a minute before the ad break, so I will mention my top most underrated film of 2011, the Ewan McGregor... Is it Eva Green? I think it is Eva Green. Ewan McGregor, Eva Green movie called Perfect Sense. It is a movie I have essentially never heard anyone talk about, and it was the most interesting film I saw in 2011. It is a movie that is just a low, quiet drama, but when you visit the concept, you realize it's high science fiction. Here's the idea. One day, out of the blue, everyone on Earth loses their sense of taste. Suddenly. The whole world. And there's a massive shift in how we live our lives, because no one can taste anything anymore. And there's a period of adjustment, and everyone starts to get back to their normal lives. And Ewan McGregor plays a cook in this movie, so he is greatly affected by this. And then, everybody thinks things are going to be normal, and then everyone loses their sense of smell. And you realize we're going down a rabbit hole where one by one, the entire human race's senses are shutting off one at a time in a global epidemic. It is a truly brilliant, disturbing movie. And the deeper you get into it, and it is, of course, a kind of a star-crossed love story and multiple other things. The movie is a quiet drama, but it really made me feel something and really made me think. All the way to the last frame of this film, I was completely riveted. That's called Perfect Sense. It's from 2011. We'll be back in a moment with more of the most underrated films of the decade. We're still real early on in this decade. We'll be back in a minute. Is that even on your radar, Perfect Sense?
No.
Should be. I mean, I've already said too much about it. You should have seen it cold. It's a good movie night movie. If you say, hey, we're just going to watch this now. Let's just see what you think. But it's more like poem. You know, those movies are like, it's just so sweetly tied together. And it's painful in places. You're like, man. But I found myself consistently saying, now what would I think if I was living this? I think taste is first. I'm not even sure about that, but I think it's first. And it becomes a whole story about, like, well, what happens when nobody really cares about what they're eating anymore? And it all changes. It all becomes texture. Everybody gets into texture. But the movie will fuck you up. I hope so. That's the whole idea, right?
Sessions is on air
All right,
every
we're
Thursday
back.
from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Live only on CJLO 1690 AM and on CJLO.com.
We're back on CGL at 1690 AM. Our show is Cinema Smackdown, and today we're running down the most underrated films of the decade. We are still way, way at the top. We finally managed to get through 2010. We have just cracked 2011. And Shane, give me a 2011 movie that means something to you.
Well, for me, the absolute top choice for 2011 is a Norwegian thriller called Headhunters.
Oh.
I don't want to say too much about this film, but it is willing to go to extremes that make me so happy.
It's charming, though.
It is charming, yeah.
Very
It's charming.
Very easy to watch.
But there are crazy moments in this film where you will sit there and go, wow, I've never seen a film go there, and it just went there big.
To be fair, despite the fact that it's called Headhunters, it's not like a...
Oh, no. That was,
it's
yeah.
kind of a misleading title. It's a charming crime film.
Yes, it is a crime film, and the Headhunters is more in the corporate sense of the word of
Just in
looking
case-
looking to recruit someone.
Just mention
That's-
this on the
that's-
off chance that the title puts anyone off.
Yeah.
It's
It is not a decapitation movie.
It's not a decapitation fest. Yeah, I also strongly recommend it. It is kind of well known, but it's still... Is it German? What language?
Norwegian.
Norwegian. It's hardly going to be a big North American film. It's it's often...
I'm surprised.
around.
I'm not aware of an American remake of this film. It just feels like one of those.
It's
Hey,
an easy one.
that was really good. Let's do a North American remake of the film that has none of the good stuff in it.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
They do that with they're doing that with other Norwegian films. I'm thinking of Insomnia in particular as the one. Even though oh God, what's his Christopher Nolan directed the remake, and it had people like
Toothless remake.
Yeah, it had people like Robin Williams and Al Pacino in it, and it missed all the great stuff that was in the original film.
It took every corner and sanded down every edge.
Yeah.
All the way to the end. It was like compromise after compromise. It's astonishing.
And I am a big Christopher Nolan fan, but even he can't do remakes. Well, me and many people who
detractor.
outnumber you.
I don't need it to be. It's not a contest of numbers.
Yes, it is.
No. That was the
That's
case,
how democracy works.
If that was the case, A, I wouldn't have a radio show. B, boy, would my opinion not matter, because it is rarely in the majority. And that's the whole point of our list today. These are not the movies the majority was after. You'll notice we're not mentioning many Christopher Nolan movies. They've gotten plenty of press.
Oh, yeah, they have, yes.
I will quickly mention... most of my 2011 movies are sort of quick mentions, so that's lucky. I guess the most highly recommended would have to be a film called The Woman. After Perfect Sense is my number one of most underrated. But The Woman, simply, it's almost as dark a film as our earlier recommended Red, White, and Blue. It is the concept of, hey, I found a feral woman in the woods. I should kidnap her, tie her up in my garage, and edumacate her. Oh boy, is that a terrible idea. The film kind of goes through the paces you would expect it to with the plot I just described until the last act, which is stunning and uncompromising. The last 25 minutes of that movie are unforgettable. It is a movie directed by Lucky McKee. It is by far my favorite of his work. I like a lot of what he does. He even made arguably a throwaway straight-to-VOD John Cusack movie a couple of years ago, which I think has merit. It's quite good for one of those movies, a heist-type movie with Cusack and a few other people. But The Woman is the one I'm talking about, and it's never left me in the sense of, wow, I think that hurt a little. It stayed there. Great performances. So that's a quick one on that. You got another 2011 for me?
Keeping with the foreign films, I will mention a rare example from Cuba. We don't get too many movies coming out of Cuba. But we have a zombie comedy worth checking out called Juan of the Dead. Yes, playing on Shaun of the Dead, the title. But it's a nice look at Havana society as it stands today. And rare for a fun zombie comedy to come out of a largely failed communist state like Cuba.
What else have I got quickly? There's a little film from 2011 called Brooklyn Brothers Beat the Best. And you should try this movie, watch the first 7 minutes or so. You'll know right away if the sense of humor works for you. It's a guy who's trying to make it as a musician. And he's in a band, and that band is quite terrible. And it's about to hit big, and he gets fired. and he knows it's a terrible band. He decides to go out and just try again. And he meets a super weirdo. And this super weirdo becomes his musical partner. And they travel around together singing songs. And the important thing for me about anything with music is the music has to be interesting. And it has to have a feeling like it's actually being performed by the characters somehow. This movie has that in spades. I love the dynamic between the two guys. I love the songs. I managed to find the soundtrack for this movie, which I adore. It's a tiny little indie film called Brooklyn Brothers Beat the Best. It really is quite charming. I use that word a lot. It's also a film that just no one's ever talked about. It so is worth making people aware of some of these tiny movies. It is such a great little film. Written and directed by the star whose name totally escapes me. And I didn't write notes. It's Ryan Onan? Oh, that's right off the top of my head. I think it's like Ryan Onan or Ryan O something. Look up Brooklyn Brothers Beat the Best, and please seek it out. It is very much worth your time. I'll quickly just say another one that you need to revisit, which is Detention.
Oh, dear.
That movie is like 3 great movies crammed together
into one terrible movie.
in a blender. I will admit, it's messy as hell, but there's so much good it just asks so much of you in one viewing experience. But if you watch any 6 minutes of this film by itself, there's fantastic ideas in it. And I totally understand if you say, overall, this movie doesn't work. It does for me, but I really want it to. That means I'm working to like it. But Detention has a lot going for it. It's another one. First 10 minutes of that movie, you know what you're watching. They give you a lot in 10 minutes. It's like John Hughes plus horror movie, plus teen, it's a depiction, you take apart the concept of what it is to be a young person today, it goes on and on. There's so much weirdness is going on in this movie. It is very, very stylized. The style may not work for you, but it is undeniably a huge swing. So it's called Detention. And,
well, if we're going into obnoxious cinema, then I guess now would be the perfect time for me to mention the last time I will ever give a crap about any Kevin Smith movie,
right.
And that is Red State.
Sorry, is there a walrus in that movie?
Yeah, no, we will...
no walrus equals no watch from me.
Tusk is also an interesting film to talk about.
Absolutely.
But there's many things in that film that just offend me to my core.
Red State was hardly underrated. It was probably his most beloved movie.
Was it really? Because it's so unlike most of what he does.
Yeah, but it got a lot of press, is I guess what I mean.
When I saw it, at that point I had given up on Kevin Smith. But seeing Red State, it was like, oh, if this was the first film from a new director, this would be a promising young director to keep an eye on. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it was about his 10th film. And it barely made me give a crap about him again, but I did appreciate the effort to do a horror film and it's kind of a torture porn film. It is most notable because Michael Parks has a monologue in this film that goes on for a tremendous amount of time, and it is one of the most riveting things I've seen in a decade.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I can't say anything negative. I quite liked Red State. Oh, you know what? I can say a massive negative thing about Red State. It's a good movie. It's worth seeing. But it's poorly written in terms of dialogue between the main characters because they constantly just drop the F-bomb nonstop.
Yeah, well...
no variations. It's like anytime they're
it sadly is not devoid of Kevin Smithisms, but... Just
that. The fact that every time they see something that they're surprised by, they scream the same sentence again and hundreds of times. And it's deadening to me. But mind you, that is a small complaint in a movie I otherwise think is quite
see it from Michael Parks.
Yeah, it has some really interesting stuff in it. I have 4 more movies to mention as quickly as possible. There's a film from 2011. It is the tiniest character piece crime film. It's called few options, it is not remarkable. And in and of that, it is kind of a perfect film. It is just a tiny little portrait of a criminal doing his thing. Few options. There's also The Big Year with Steve Martin, and the entire movie is simply, let's go look at birds. I found it massively compelling. It's Steve Martin, Owen Wilson, and Jack Black competitively looking at birds. It's almost the Raiders of the Lost Ark of standing in a field looking at birds movies. I really love Big Year, and no one ever talks about it. Another one is Thin Ice with Greg Kinnear and Alan Arkin, and it is just a perfect character actor hanging out movie. Perfect. Thin Ice. More said about that ruins the film. It's just a perfect little one. And finally, for 2011, myself, there's a little movie called simply Vampire. And it is a tiny art film by a Japanese director. It's quite long. It's well over 2 hours. And it's an American movie with English-speaking white actors doing their thing. And it's just a guy who's doing weird, terrible things to people, who's sort of a vampire. Not a supernatural vampire. He just sort of is. It's calm. It's meditative. It's unpleasant in places. But it is a spectacular art film. And even if you're kind of like, I'm not sure about this, the last 10 minutes should really win you over. It has a spectacular, weird ending. It works. Works in the context of the film. I don't mean it's that weird. That's called Vampire. That's a little hard to Google. But from 2011. Shane, what have you got left for me in 2 minutes? 1 minute.
I will rattle off as quickly as I can. So we're both.
We can always come back to it if we have to. So don't feel.
Yeah. But let's at least wrap up one more year.
Sure.
We're both tremendous Craig Zoller fans. S. Craig Zoller.
2011?
Yeah, well, it's sort of his prototype film, which was Asylum Blackout, which is based on one of his scripts. He didn't direct it himself.
Movie, yes.
It is, yes. But if you're a completionist for him, you should definitely check it out. I do want to mention that I'm a tremendous fan of the films of Bobcat Goldthwait, and this is by no means his best film, but it still has that certain sensibility that I quite like from him. It's called God Bless America.
I think it's his second best film.
Well, I would put it more in the middle of the pack, but it is a great diatribe against modern America and all its pop culture excesses, to the point where, justifiable killing spree, let's go for it, comedy. Here's a bizarre choice that I want to throw in, but I have to. It is a buddy medieval night film starring Nicolas Cage and Ron Perlman called Season of the Witch.
Well done.
And it is about two guys transporting a witch for final judgment and execution. Check out the alternate ending, which is not the CGA crapfest that they ended up tacking onto the film.
All right, we're totally out of time. We may mention one or two next week. This has been our most underrated films, the first episode
of many.
Smackdown. We'll be back next week with many, many more. Keep that pen handy. Wow, that was really, 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 really fast. I wish we had another hour right now.
Yeah.
In fact, who knows, maybe I'll petition an extra hour at some point during this period, just if the weeks that we're if you're open to it, just so we can get through more years.
Yeah, maybe.
It feels like we won't have that time. Hey, buddy.
Hey,
guys.
Good timing.
In the city has reached between 15 and 26% over the last 5 years,
Oh, nice.
while a normal rate would be between 4 and 7%.
Good.
I'm having a great day.
At City Hall, and more public
Good times,
consultations are
great day.
expected to resume in January.
Thank you so much for being here. It means I don't have to
from
get the key.
Canada are demonstrating against a massive oil sands mine
All right,
for
we'll
northern
leave you to it.
Alberta. Two protests organized by Indigenous Climate Action, an Indigenous-led organization, were held in Madrid, Spain. One outside the Canadian Embassy.
So was
and
that
another
the
at a
best
gas
of this
station
year,
climate
or
change
Best
best
of
of
the
the
decade,
The goals of
starting in
the demonstrations are
2010.
Okay.
penetration
Barely got through 2011.
and
Spent the
There's
majority
so
of the
many.
hour doing 2010. I really wanted to wrap this up in 2 to 3 episodes, and it might take us 6.
But as we said, there's diminishing returns as the decade goes along. We're like a lot more stuff at the beginning of the decade rather than the end.
Yeah.
But it has literally been the case this